My boss didn't say a word when he placed the manila envelope on my desk that Tuesday morning. He just slid it under my keyboard, the way you'd hide a love note in middle school, and walked away. But his hand was trembling. I watched it shake as he pulled back, and I knew then that whatever was inside that envelope was about to break my life in half. I'd worked at Hartwell & Briggs Financial for 11 years. Compliance officer. The job nobody at parties ever asked about twice. I reconciled accounts, flagged irregularities, filed paperwork with the SEC, and went home at 6 to pick up my daughter Mira from after-school care. That was my life. I was 38, divorced for 4 years, and I lived in a 2-bedroom condo in Bethesda, Maryland that I could barely afford on my salary alone. My ex paid child support, sometimes on time, sometimes not. I drove a 2015 Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper that I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. Nothing about me screamed target. That's what made it so terrifying. The envelope was thick, maybe a 1/4 inch. No name, no markings. I let it sit there for almost 20 minutes while I pretended to read emails. My boss, a man I'll call Mr. Hadley, because I still can't bring myself to write his real name even now, didn't look at me again. He sat in his glass office at the far end of the floor, on a phone call, gesturing with one hand. Perfectly normal. Except every few minutes, his eyes flicked toward my desk. At 10:43 in the morning, I took the envelope to the women's bathroom on the 4th floor. I locked myself in the handicap stall. I sat on the closed toilet lid with the envelope on my lap and stared at it for another full minute before I opened it. Inside was a folded sheet of yellow legal paper, handwritten. Underneath that was a one-way ticket, Amtrak, Union Station to White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, departing at 6:15 that evening. Underneath the ticket was a flip phone, the kind you buy at a gas station, still in its plastic shell. And underneath the phone was a photograph. The photograph was of Mira, my daughter. She was standing at the bus stop on the corner of Bradley Boulevard and Wilson Lane, the bus stop where I dropped her off every morning at 7:45. She was wearing her purple jacket with the little white flowers on the cuffs. The jacket she'd put on 3 hours ago. She was holding her green lunchbox. She didn't know she was being photographed. I want you to understand something. I'm not a woman prone to dramatics. I was the kid who held it together when my father died. I didn't cry at my divorce hearing. I have, in my entire adult life, fainted exactly once, and that was after giving birth. But sitting on that toilet lid in the 4th floor bathroom, looking at a photograph of my 8-year-old daughter taken that morning by someone she never saw, I felt my entire body go cold from the inside out, like ice water running through my veins instead of blood. I read the legal paper next. The handwriting was Mr. Hadley's. I'd seen it on 1,000 memos. Do not go back to your desk. Do not call your ex-husband. Do not call your ex-husband. Do not call your mother. Pick up Mira from school right now. Go to your sister's house in Frederick. Pack 1 bag each. Use only the burner phone. The train leaves at 6:15. Get on it. I will call you at 6:30 with one number. Trust nobody at the firm. You have until midnight before they know you've seen what's inside. I am so sorry, Lauren. I had no other choice. That was my name, Lauren. He'd never called me Lauren in 11 years, always Ms. Pierce. I sat there. My hands shook so badly I dropped the photograph and had to pick it up off the bathroom floor. Someone came in, used a stall, washed their hands, left. I think I held my breath the entire time. What had I seen? That was the question burning in my chest. What had I seen in 11 years of reconciling accounts that someone wanted my 8-year-old daughter dead for? Because that's what the photograph meant. Whoever took that picture wanted me to know they could reach her. That she was a key on a ring and they were holding it. I thought about the past 2 months. There had been an account I'd flagged in September, a series of wire transfers from a shell company in Delaware to an account in the Cayman Islands, then back to a domestic account under a different name. The pattern was textbook layering. I'd written it up, sent it to Mr. Hadley, and 3 days later he'd told me the matter was resolved and I should close the file. I'd asked why. He'd said, "Lauren, just close it." That was the first time he ever used my first name. I'd thought it was strange at the time, but I'd closed the file. That was 8 weeks ago. I hadn't thought about it since. I walked out of the bathroom at 10:59. I did not go back to my desk. I took the stairs down 4 flights, walked out the side door past the loading dock, and got in my car. I drove. Not toward Mira's school. Not yet. I drove 3 blocks to a CVS, parked, and went inside. I bought a prepaid debit card with $300 on it using cash from my wallet. I bought a phone charger. I bought a baseball cap. I came back out, sat in my car, and tore the SIM card out of my iPhone with my house key. I dropped it in a storm drain. Then I drove to Mira's school. The receptionist at Cabin John Elementary knew me. I told her there was a family emergency and I needed to take Mira home immediately. She made a call to the classroom. I signed Mira out. My signature looked like a 7-year-old's. Mira came down the hallway with her backpack, confused, and when she saw my face, she said, "Mommy, are you crying?" I wasn't, but my face must have looked like I had been. I told her, "Sweetheart, we're going on an adventure. Right now, I need you to be a big girl and not ask too many questions yet, okay? I promise I will explain everything. But right now, we just have to go." She nodded. She's a serious child, Mira. She always has been. Even as a toddler, she'd watch you with those careful eyes, like she was trying to figure out if you were telling her the truth. We got in the car. I drove to my sister's house in Frederick, an hour up Interstate 270. I called my sister from the burner phone while I was driving. Her name is Bridget. I told her not to ask questions, just to be home and to not tell anyone we were coming, not even her husband. She started to ask why. And I said, "Bridge, please." And she stopped. The drive was the longest hour of my life. Every car behind us, I thought, that's them. Every car that pulled off and was replaced by another one, I thought, they're handing me off? Mira was quiet in the back seat. She'd taken a book out of her backpack, The One and Only Ivan, and she was pretending to read it. But I could see in the rear view that her eyes weren't moving. She was waiting. At Bridget's house, I told her almost everything. I showed her the photograph. She put her hand over her mouth and didn't take it away for a long time. Then she said, "What do you need?" I asked her to pack a bag for me and Mira. Clothes for 3 days, no electronics, nothing with location tracking. I asked her to lend me $400 in cash. I asked her to take my car and drive it somewhere far. Leave it in a long-term parking lot, anywhere, somewhere it wouldn't be found for a week. She nodded to all of it. Mira asked me while Bridget was packing, "Mommy, are the bad people coming?" I knelt down in front of her in my sister's kitchen, and I held her face in my hands. And I said, "There are some people who made a mistake, and Mommy has to fix it. And while Mommy fixes it, you and I are going on a trip together. It's going to feel scary sometimes. But I promise you, I will not let anything happen to you." "Do you believe me?" she said. "Yes." I said, "Good, because I need you to be brave with me." She said, "Okay, Mommy." Bridget drove us to Union Station in D.C. We got there at 5:50. The station was full of commuters going home, business people with rolling suitcases, tourists. We walked through the main hall, found our platform, and waited. I held Mira's hand so tightly I'm sure I hurt her. She didn't complain. The train pulled in at 6:12. We boarded. We took 2 seats in the back of a half-empty car. At 6:15 on the dot, the train pulled out of the station. At 6:30, the burner phone rang. The voice was a woman's, older, calm. She said, "Lauren, my name is Margaret. I worked with Daniel Hadley a long time ago. He gave you my number because I'm the only person who can help you finish what he started. Are you on the train? I said yes. She said, good. When you arrive in White Sulphur Springs at 1:47 in the morning, there will be a black Ford F-150 in the parking lot. The driver is my son, Wesley. He looks like me. Tall, gray beard, wearing a Steelers cap. He will take you to a cabin. You will be safe there for at least 3 days. Do you understand? I said yes. She said, Lauren, before I tell you why this is happening, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Your boss is dead. I felt the train car spin a little. I gripped the edge of my seat. Mira was sitting next to me with her head against my shoulder, her eyes closed, half asleep. I turned my face toward the window so she couldn't see me. I said, when? She said, 40 minutes ago. They're calling it a heart attack. It wasn't. He knew it was coming. That's why he gave you the envelope. I asked her what was in the file I'd flagged in September. The shell company, the wires. She said it wasn't shell companies, Lauren. It was one shell company, and it was funneling money to a senator's re-election campaign, plus 4 other politicians, plus a federal judge in the Fourth Circuit. The money came from a foreign government. The original deposit was made by a man who, on paper, doesn't exist. But he does exist. And he's the reason you're on this train. He's the reason your daughter was photographed this morning. I asked her, why me? I closed the file. I did what Mr. Hadley told me to do. I didn't say anything to anyone. There was a long pause. Then Margaret said, because you didn't just close the file, Lauren. The night you wrote it up, before you sent it to Daniel, you saved a backup copy to a personal cloud drive. He saw you do it. He didn't tell anyone. He knew that someday he might need a witness who could still produce the original documents. I had forgotten that. I had completely forgotten. I'd done it because 2 years earlier, my boss had lost a flagged report due to a server crash, and I'd started backing everything up to my private Google Drive out of paranoia. I hadn't even thought about it. It was automatic. I asked, what do you want me to do? Margaret said, I want you to send those files to 3 specific journalists, 2 federal investigators, and a deputy in the Department of Justice. I will give you the email addresses when you arrive at the cabin, but you have to send them from a specific computer at a specific location, because the men who want this buried have been monitoring every major cloud service for any document with this signature. If you send it from your phone or a laptop on a normal internet connection, they'll intercept it before it reaches the recipients. There's exactly 1 safe relay point in the country. It's in a cabin in the Allegheny Mountains. You're going there now. I said, why a cabin? Why not just hand it to the FBI? She said, because 3 of the people on that money trail are in the FBI. I closed my eyes. Mira shifted against my shoulder. The train rocked gently. I could hear the wheels on the tracks, that old steady rhythm. I asked, why didn't Mr. Hadley do this himself? Why didn't you do this? You knew about it. Why is it me? Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I will never forget. She said, because the cloud drive is registered to your personal email, with your personal recovery phone, your personal security questions, there is no way for me, or Daniel, or anyone else to access those files without you physically logging in. We could have asked you. We almost did 6 weeks ago. But Daniel was being followed by then. He couldn't risk telling you, because the moment you knew, you became a target. The only way to protect you was to keep you ignorant until the last possible moment, then move you. He gave you the envelope this morning because he found out last night that your name was already on a list. They were going to take Mira after school today. Daniel bought you 8 hours. He paid for those hours with his life. I started crying then. Quietly, so Mira wouldn't wake up. I cried for that man, that quiet man with the trembling hand, who had sat in his glass office for the last 6 weeks, knowing he was going to die, planning every step so that I would survive. I'd known him for 11 years. I had never once invited him to lunch. I had never asked about his family. I had not, in 11 years, asked him a single personal question. And he had died for my daughter. Margaret let me cry. After a while, she said, "Lauren, there's one more thing. When you get to the cabin, Wesley will show you a room. In that room, there's a laptop and an internet connection that routes through a server I've maintained for 9 years. The files have to come from your account, but the relay has to come from there. There's no other way. Are you with me?" I said. "Yes." She said, "Good. Sleep if you can. I'll see you tomorrow." She hung up. The train rolled through the dark for the next 7 hours. I didn't sleep. I watched my daughter sleep. I watched the trees blur past in the moonlight. I thought about 1,000 things. I thought about my ex-husband, who I hadn't called and wouldn't call, because I didn't know if I could trust him not to panic. I thought about my mother in Pittsburgh. I thought about the day Mira was born, and the nurse who put her on my chest, and the way her tiny fist closed around my finger like she'd been waiting for me her whole life. I thought about Mr. Hadley's wedding ring. He'd worn it for all 11 years I knew him, but I'd never asked about his wife. We pulled into White Sulphur Springs at 1:47 in the morning. The platform was empty except for one man under a yellow light, tall, gray beard, Steelers cap. Wesley. He didn't say much. He took our bag, walked us to the truck, helped Mira into the back seat. He drove for 45 minutes up into the mountains on roads that got narrower and darker. Mira fell asleep again with her head in my lap. I kept my hand on her back the whole drive. The cabin was small. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen, a living room with a wood stove. Wesley showed me the second room, which was barely a closet, with a desk, an old desktop computer, and a single light bulb. He told me Margaret would call in the morning. He told me there was food in the fridge. He told me there were 2 rifles in the closet by the front door, loaded, and that I should keep one near me at all times. He told me Mira shouldn't go outside without him. He said, "Ma'am, I want you to know something. My mother trusts your boss. She trusted him for 40 years. That means I trust you. Anything you need, you just say." I put Mira to bed in the bedroom. I sat in a chair next to her bed for a long time, watching her breathe. Then I went out to the living room and sat by the wood stove until the sun came up. Margaret called at 8:30. She walked me through the email addresses. She walked me through what to write in the message. She walked me through how to attach the 17 files from my cloud drive. She walked me through verifying the recipients. She told me very carefully that once I hit send, I could not hit send again because the relay would burn after a single transmission and there would be no second chance. I sat down at the desk. I opened the laptop. I logged into my Google account. The files were there, exactly where I'd left them, in a folder I'd named Missing September because I am not a creative woman. I attached them. I wrote the message. I cried while I wrote it. I wrote about Mr. Hadley. I wrote that he had given his life so that this information could reach the people reading it. I wrote that I was a compliance officer with 11 years at Hartwell and Briggs, and that the documents attached were authentic, with original metadata, and that I would testify to their authenticity in any court before any grand jury, under any oath. I wrote that I was a mother and that someone had photographed my daughter to frighten me into silence. I wrote that I was not silent. I read the message twice. I checked the recipients twice. Then I hit send. The laptop screen showed message sent for a half second, then went black. The light in the room flickered. Wesley shouted from the kitchen. "It's done, right?" I called back. "Yes." He said, "Good. The relays burned. We're dark now." I sat in that chair for a long time. I don't know how long. At some point, I started to laugh, and then I started to cry, and then I just sat there with my hands in my lap. It was 3 days before anything happened. We stayed at the cabin. Wesley cooked. Mira and I read books and played cards and went on short walks in the woods when he could come with us. I asked her one afternoon if she was scared, and she said, "A little, but I'm with you." That was the answer. On the fourth morning, Wesley brought a small television out from a closet and plugged it into a generator and pointed an antenna out the window. We watched the news. It was on every channel. A senator from a state I won't name had resigned the night before. A federal judge had been suspended pending an emergency investigation. 2 FBI assistant directors were on administrative leave. A foreign embassy had recalled 3 of its diplomats. The Department of Justice had announced a special counsel. My name wasn't in any of it. Mr. Hadley's name wasn't either. We were ghosts in our own story. Wesley drove us back to a federal facility in Charlottesville on the 6th day. There were 2 U.S. Marshals waiting for me. They were the only 2 people Margaret had vouched for. I sat in a small room with them for 9 hours and told them everything. I gave them my passwords. I gave them the metadata. I signed a statement. They asked if I wanted to enter the Witness Protection Program. They explained what it would mean. New name, new city, new school for Mira. My mother and sister would not be able to contact me except through the program. My ex-husband would lose custody rights unless he came with us, which they couldn't promise. I thought about it for 1 full day. I said no. The senior marshal, a woman in her 50s named Officer Pell, asked me if I was sure. I said yes. She asked me why. I said, because I want my daughter to know that what we did was the right thing. And I want her to know it in our own kitchen, in our own house, on our own street. I don't want her to learn the lesson of her life by losing everything that made her her. The men who took that photograph of her are going to prison. The ones who aren't, who run, they're not coming back to a small condo in Bethesda for a mid-level compliance officer. They've got bigger problems now. We're going home. She nodded. She said, I figured, but I had to ask. They put us up in a hotel for 2 more weeks. Federal agents drove past my condo every hour for the first 3 months, then every 4 hours, then every day. Then they stopped because nothing happened. Nobody came. I went back to work. Not at Hartwell and Briggs. The firm collapsed within a month. I took a job at a credit union, smaller salary, fewer hours, closer to home. I picked Mira up from school every day. I didn't miss a single afternoon for the first 6 months. I called Mr. Hadley's wife. Her name was Eleanor. I'd never met her. I drove up to their house in Annapolis on a Saturday and sat with her in her kitchen and told her everything her husband had done. She already knew most of it. The marshals had told her, but she let me tell her anyway. She held my hand across the table. She said, he always thought you were the best of his people, the straightest. He said you were the only one he was sure of. I cried. She didn't. She'd done her crying. I asked her what I could do. She said, be the woman he thought you were. That's all he wanted. I drove home that night. Mira was at my sister's. I went into my condo, sat on the couch, and looked around at the small life I had almost lost. The crayon drawing on the fridge, the library books on the coffee table, the dent in the wall where Mira had thrown a remote at her cousin 2 Christmases ago. I thought about the woman I had been on that Tuesday morning, sitting at my desk in a button-down blouse, sipping cold coffee, watching a manila envelope slide under my keyboard. I thought about how small my life had felt to me that morning, how invisible I'd been, how I'd resented, sometimes, the boredom of my work, the predictability of my days, the way nobody ever asked the compliance officer how she was doing. But I had been seen by one man, one quiet, tired, doomed man who had watched me for 11 years and decided that when the worst hour of his life arrived, I was the person he would trust with the truth. I am not a hero. I never have been. I am a mother who works at a credit union and rides a Honda Civic with a dent in the bumper. I am the woman who packs lunches and signs permission slips and worries about the electric bill. But I am also the woman who got on that train. And I would do it again, in a heartbeat, for my daughter, for that quiet man, for the truth he died protecting. If you remember nothing else from my story, remember this: the smallest people in the smallest rooms are sometimes the only ones standing between the truth and the dark. And we are stronger than we look. All of us are. Mira is 9 now. She doesn't ask about that week very often, but sometimes when I tuck her in, she'll look up at me with those careful, serious eyes and she'll say, "Mommy, I'm glad you were brave." And I'll say, "Sweetheart, I was brave because of you." And I'll turn off the light, and I'll close her door, and I'll stand in the hallway for a minute, listening to my own heartbeat, just to remind myself that I'm still here, that she's still here, that we made it home. I think about that Tuesday morning more often than I'd like to admit. Not the train ride, not the cabin, not the moment I hit send. I think about the woman I was at. 10:43 in the morning, walking to the bathroom with an envelope I didn't want to open, because that woman didn't know yet that the small, quiet choices she'd been making for 11 years were about to save her daughter's life. That backup file I saved out of paranoia in September, I almost didn't do it. I was tired that night. I wanted to go home, but I'd been burned once before, and something in me said, do it anyway. That one decision, made at 10 o'clock at night by a tired woman in an empty office, was the thread the whole story hung on. If I hadn't saved that file, Mr. Hadley wouldn't have had a witness. He would have died for nothing. Mira would have been taken. I would have lost everything. Here's what I've come to believe. Character is not something you build in the big moments. It's something you build in the small ones, when nobody's watching, when there's no reward, when the easier choice is right there in front of you. You build it by being honest in the meetings nobody cares about. You build it by flagging the account that everyone else would let slide. You build it by saving the backup file when you'd rather go home. And then one day, when the worst hour of your life arrives, the woman who shows up to meet it is the woman you've been quietly building for years. I am not a brave person by nature. I'm anxious. I overthink things. I cried in the bathroom for 10 minutes before I went to pick up my daughter, but I had spent 11 years training myself without knowing it to do the harder right thing when the easier wrong thing was available, and that training carried me when my courage couldn't. The other thing I learned is this: we are not as alone as we think we are. Mr. Hadley watched me for 11 years. I never knew. He saw who I was when I didn't know he was looking. Margaret trusted me on his word alone. Her son drove us up a mountain in the middle of the night because his mother said so. Strangers built a chain of protection around me and my daughter that I didn't even know existed until the moment I needed it. That chain was built out of small acts of integrity, across decades, by people who never met each other. So if you take anything from my story, take this. Be honest in the small rooms. Be careful with the small files. Pay attention to the quiet people at the edge of your life, because one of them may be watching, and one of them may someday be the difference between your child going home and your child being lost. We are all building something with every choice we make. I just didn't know what I was building until the day I needed it to hold.